So there was an early question about if the trial participants took V&I for between 2 and 6 years, why now are we only talking about 15 months? Well, this question actually arrived, Tal, before you explained that this is the difference that we're in fact trying to make.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. And so the initial approval for ibrutinib and venetoclax came from another study called GLOW study and another study called Captivate study, which was again an international trial. And in that trial, this combination was given for only 15 months, and it was one size fits all. And after 15 months, everybody stopped the treatment. And that treatment was superior to another treatment we used to give in the past called chlorambucil with the venetuzumab. And that led to the approval of the drug for 15 months based on that study. And that's what we can access in NHS at this moment in time for our patients. The FLAIR trial has just reported out now in terms of that this treatment might be superior to the other treatments that I talked about. But in this trial, we didn't compare 2 or 6 years of therapy to 15 months of ibrutinib venetoclax, because that was never a question. And if I have to take everybody back to 2014 and 2017. In 2017, none of this was available. So essentially, that's the problem we're facing with CLL, that the treatments are getting better and better all the time. And what we are going to try to do is to present this data to the NICE to see, and we're working with the pharma companies as well to see if that extra treatment would be beneficial for our patients. But that's the next steps that we need to take to get approvals.
A question here that's about, can you advise how you engage with the clinical departments across the country to promote the trials and engage with potential patients?
So in terms of our engagement with hospitals across the UK, so we engage in multiple ways. We schedule frequent webinars with them. So for example, the latest webinars that have taken place have been over the summer, just before we've before we've rolled out the new protocol, which opened up static to a wider population, which includes acalabrutinib patients. So that was really beneficial for our hospitals, as it gave us an opportunity to explain the changes that are coming in that amendment, and also open the floor up for any of their questions or concerns, or any feedback that they may have as a result of this amendment being rolled out. So we do plan to have another session with sites, so another webinar in October, almost as a checking in how they've been getting on with the implementation of the amendment since the summer, and again an opportunity to hear more from researchers from our teams in terms of how are they finding working to the new protocol, and if there's any additional feedback they have, any considerations we may want to make to the protocol to make future changes in order to minimise burden on the hospital staff, but also on patients as well. So that's our engagement with sites. We also do release quarterly newsletters updating the trial sites on just trial progress in general. In terms of our patient engagement, so I mentioned the website, so that's one way we engage. We would try to advertise the trial that way. And we're also currently working on putting through an amendment so that we can start distributing newsletters to patients as well, so they have they can access information in paper format as well as on the website as an alternative way of receiving information.
Question here about when does a PFS, that's a progression-free survival, measure from?
There's various ways of trying to decide how well our treatments work. So because the outcomes in CLL are so much better than they used to be, and people are living a lot longer because the treatments are so fantastic. And there's some evidence that people who are on these treatments like ibrutinib and acalabrutinib, once you start on treatment, your survival is almost the same as the general population, so people that don't have CLL. So that's great. What it means is trying to measure how effective a treatment is not as easy. And so the best measure of a treatment is does it make people live longer, which is overall survival. But if your treatment's really good, that can be quite hard to do. And it's a problem that collectively we run up against in CLL, which is a nice problem to have. So we sort of measure surrogate endpoints or endpoints that are thought to be clinically important. So progression-free survival is essentially the time is taken from the point at which you enter the trial, you're on your treatment, and then within the trial at the start, you define what you think progression means in the trial. And generally, it's if the white cells start to go up or the lymph glands start to enlarge. And at the point at which that is first noted, which sort of implies the treatment stopped working, then that's the time. So you say, well, you started on your treatment in 1st of January 2018, and then on the 1st of January 2025, you noticed a lump in your neck and saw someone like me. That would be the point at which you would then say, well, okay, the person's progressed, and then it's a time interval between the two.
We've got a question here about, I've got CLL, but I'm not treated yet. And it seems odd that there's no trial for starting treatment. So Tal, I think this comes back to you talking about what the options were. So this trial is for a particular stage, and I think that's perhaps the point that we need to emphasize.
Yes, that's a very good question. There are two things to this. One is that at the moment, we still treat CLL when it is causing symptoms, and there are some indications, what we call as IWCLL criteria to start treatment. So nearly, we know that a third of patients with CLL will never need treatment in their lifetime. And the reason we don't treat CLL straight away or in asymptomatic disease is because these drugs are very good, but they all carry side effects. So we don't want to harm our patients with the treatments where they might not see the benefit of the treatment. There is the FLAIR trial was a trial which was looking at patients who do need treatment frontline, and if the trial was open for recruitment now, then that trial would be there for recruitment, getting patients into the study. We do have number of other pharmaceutical-driven trials and some other new trials that are in development from UK as well. So please watch the space, and I think there would be some more trials coming for people who do need treatment for CLL. Like I said, it's very important to say that patients who do not have symptoms do not need treatment for CLL, and that could be a third of patients with CLL.
CLL Support is here for people with CLL, and then the much smaller number of people that have got SLL. And we've got one question here about, I assume it means it's about SLL. When monitoring people with SLL, are the MRD tests as effective? And also, how is the condition of the spleen monitored?
Yes, so in terms of SLL, I'll just explain the difference that in SLL, there is very little amount of disease circulating in the blood or in the bone marrow. But in nearly all patients with SLL, we do see disease in the blood or in the bone marrow as well. The spleen is measured either with CT scans or ultrasound or clinical examination. And when we do the clinical examination, we are able to feel the spleen. And if the spleen has come down in size, then essentially it means that there is a response to therapy. All the data suggests that SLL patients do as well as CLL patients. It's more about the genomics of the leukemia which are more important. So the answer to the question, simple answer is yes, spleen can be assessed clinically, or if needed, an ultrasound or a CT scan can be done. But the MRD test is able to tell us how well the patients are responding. And when we looked at our data in FLAIR, both CLL and SLL patients were responding as well as we would like them to. So there was no difference between the two.
So somebody's asking about I with V, so ibrutinib with venetoclax, is available in the UK privately, is it, but not approved by NICE? Is that the point?
Ibrutinib and venetoclax is currently approved for use on the NHS by the NHS's body NICE, but it's approved only for 15 months in line with studies that were published out of Europe 2 or 3 years ago. So the approach advocated by Tal and myself and the trials team is to go one step further and say that if you continue the ibrutinib venetoclax beyond that time point and then use very sensitive tests to determine how well you've responded, you can possibly get a deeper response that translates into a longer period of time being well thereafter. But the problem is getting the NHS to buy into that approach, because if you give the treatment for longer, that incurs a bigger cost. And the NHS has got very involved and detailed ways of assessing whether or not it wishes to do that. But Tal and yourself and CLL Support are strongly advocating for that.
So is the cost of ibrutinib and venetoclax or acalabrutinib and obinutuzumab less than a traditional FCR?
No.
It's more expensive.
Okay, but the charts show it's incredibly more effective. So
that's why it's been approved. Yep.
Yes, so that's why it's been approved. It's this cost benefit, isn't it, that you were talking about before?
But it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't really matter what it costs if the NHS has looked at it and decides it's cost effective, and if it helps people to stay well and active, living their lives, and people who are working, if it keeps them in their jobs, being economically active and enjoying a full life, then that's fine. And those are all things the NHS looks at. So it doesn't really matter what it costs. If it's approved, that's the end of it.
I think the other thing to say is that with chemoimmunotherapy or FCR treatment, there was a lot more toxicity that we used to see. It was difficult to tolerate, and we were always worried about infections being a problem. But then there was another risk of other cancers as well that was heightened with the chemoimmunotherapy. So that's why we haven't given chemotherapy to our patients, which is a very good position to be in now for treating CLL.
And then there's somebody who's asked a question. They've been on ibrutinib only on the FLAIR trial, and they've now seen your charts that show that ibrutinib and venetoclax does a bit better. And can they swap over to that combination?
I'm afraid the answer is no to that question. But the thing to say is that the ibrutinib on its own is working very well for majority of the patients. And actually, I would argue that nearly 79% of the patients are doing extremely well at 5 years of follow-up now. And really, the data that is coming out now at this moment in time was not available when we were constructing the trial. So I would say that if ibrutinib is not causing any problems and you're doing well, then I would just stay on the ibrutinib. And then in the lifetime of the treatment journey, venetoclax will come, but not in this combination at this moment in time.
I mean, it is amazing now, isn't it, the choices of treatment that there are. And I keep hearing experts like you talking about the choice between all good treatments, if you like, and it's just a question of which is the best one for the person at the time. So we are in a much, much better position. I can say this is a CLL patient than we were 10 or so years ago. would taking a reduced dose of acalabrutinib to manage side effects exclude someone from participating in the trial?
Well, I think the answer to that is no. So I think the trial's been designed so that you can enter on the dose on which you were, Tal, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you can enter on the dose on which you were stable. And as long as the clinical and blood parameters are met, then I think that's okay.
Yeah, on stable dose,
Yeah.
if the standard dose is 100 milligrams twice a day, so
Yeah.
if somebody is taking 100 milligrams once a day and they have been stable on that dose for a reasonable length of time, then they can go into the study. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I was wrong in so it's a possibility to be explored. And
the other thing following on from that is these drugs are all approved at a certain dose. And the manufacturers very much dislike Tal and I advocating dose reductions or changes. But I've got plenty of people who are on a reduced dose of one of these medicines because they've had some sort of side effect, and the side effect gets better, and it still seems to work perfectly well.
I've got a couple of other questions here of people offering to take part in the trial, but as somebody that's had 15 months on INV ending a year ago, happy to give feedback, but that's probably a separate point, even though it's a really good offer. And somebody that completed 6 years on FLAIR in 2021, they're now on annual checks. They're happy to give blood samples for static, but don't want to restart medication unless there's a clinical need. So this is one of the big sort of difficult topics, isn't it? This idea of not wanting to restart medication.
Yes, so I think in terms of both questions, if I understood rightly, so ibrutinib venetoclax taken for 15 months, which was the approved treatment by NICE, or if they have participated in the study, the GLOW study, where it led to approval. I think the data is published for that study as well for 5 years, and the data is mature enough. So, and there are people who are collecting data to see what the real world data looks like for that combination as well. So, but on the trial itself, we are not in a position to compare this data with the other approach, because that was not an arm on the study, and that's why we need to be quite rigorous in our analysis of the data. The second question was about finishing 6 years on ibrutinib and now
some time ago.
Yeah, so I think if the time has lapsed that length of time, then going on to, we can't really take such a time frame for 4 years to get somebody on static. And when that's the problem with the trial, when we go into the trials, it's a major commitment from patients, because they are participating in the study, looking at the information, and there is the contribution is massive from the patients. Really, all the trial data that comes out, it's mind-blowing how much participation is required for our patients, and they have given us so much time to do that. But this is the problem with the trial. Once you're in the trial, we have a commitment from yourselves and ourselves as well that we need to, in order to maintain the integrity of the trial, we have to go through the motions. But if at any point it's not in the best interest, then you can withdraw from the trial at any point, and that is pretty much clear in the information sheet that we give to our patients.
I do know from being a patient representative that the amount of work involved by all you and your teams in putting together the trials, and it just makes me so humble as a part of the CLL community that so much work is being done to continue to improve the treatments that we're able to benefit from. One of the frustrations I have when I'm talking to people about CLL and the current prognosis and so on is the delay in the results coming through. So I think the treatments that people are having now are likely to lead to, they can't be upwards going graphs, I realise that, but sort of even more level graphs, if you like, going forward. But we won't know that for ages, will we? And the results that you presented at EHA this year, that really, I was watching your presentation online, I was able to, really impressed the room across the world about what we've been doing in the UK with the FLAIR trial. And yet that was data from quite a while ago. And inevitably, it has to take time, doesn't it?
Well, in terms of when we look at the results, if our standard of care now is improving to such an extent that when we're constructing the next trials, if, for example, what David was talking about, progression-free survival, if we use that as an endpoint for the study, we normally look at what we call as median, which means that 50% of the people who went onto the trial have progressed in the trial. So for ibrutinib now, we know that that's around 9 years. So any new treatment needs to be really, really good to beat that kind of result. And it might need a follow-up of 10, 15 years. So these trials are becoming more and more difficult in terms of to construct a new trials. But there are very clever people, more clever people than me in the stats department who work around this way. And we've got some fantastic colleagues in the University of Leeds to construct endpoints which will hopefully be able to inform us how to use the endpoints better. But I'm afraid it gets even more complicated.
Yeah. And more different drugs being available. So one of the questions here mentions pirtobrutinib, but new drugs are being developed all the time. But each person will be different, won't they? And so the outcome for each person will vary, because that's one of the things about CLL. It varies.
Yes,
so
and I think it's there are so many drugs at the moment, like you say, Hilary, and obviously pirtobrutinib is one of the drugs, but it's still not licensed well, it's licensed but not funded at this moment in time, and it's only for patients who have had nearly all of the lines of therapy and then they need it. But those trials are now ongoing at the moment where pirtobrutinib is being used in the frontline setting as well. So I'm afraid this whole space will be crowded with a lot of molecules, and when myself and clinicians like David are explaining this to our patients, it is our duty to give the best information that's out there, which is complicated to explain to clinicians, and then you have to explain that to patients as well. But that's the job that we need to do well in our clinics.
And you both explained it all ever so well today, so thank you very much for doing that. And just as we move towards the end, you did mention on one of the slides that you were keen to have the involvement of patient representatives in the trial conduct and progress to move it forward. And you were also commenting that you would like the help of bodies such as CLL Support, Leukemia Care, Lymphoma Action to try and help promote other trials. So is there anything in particular that people on this call can do to support you in that?
We're working on the thing which is very close to all of us in the trial management group is that our patients have participated in this massive study and we have got the positive results, and we want this now to be approved for patients in UK, because this is the output of the study and it is clearly showing that this is a very effective treatment for our patients delivered in this way. So when we're going to do the submissions to NICE, with the help of our pharma partners who hopefully will help us to submit this to NICE, one of the strength of the submission would be support from CLL Society and patient voice, because if that's behind the approach, then essentially NICE will listen to us and hopefully we can get approval. So that's where I was coming from. and also any help from that perspective would be very, very, very useful for us.
So are there any trials for zanubrutinib?
There are lots of trials for zanubrutinib at the moment, but they're combination trials. There are other things that are happening at the moment. But zanubrutinib is now approved as a licensed treatment. So on its own, it's not being, there are not a large number of trials, but there are combination trials that are being done for zanubrutinib.
And will there be a trial on reduced dose acalabrutinib?
Good question. So the question of dose reductions for interventions comes up a lot. My approach is that the drug is used in line with the approval and license, as that's where the evidence is. If it's a decision based on either stopping the treatment because of side effects or carrying on at reduced dose and mitigate the side effects, I'll generally try and carry on at reduced dose. You'd have to get somebody interested in essentially paying for the trial. And again, the drug company is not going to pay for a study to give less of its medicine. And the people that pay for trials to be done, they would view that as, they would see it as an important question, but they would refer to it as a trial of incremental benefit. So it's not, it's answering an important question, but it's not really driving forward improvements for all patients. So getting it funded will be difficult. But you could collect real world data, and people do that. But again, you have to find somebody to pay for that.
And a final question, has AI been useful in data analysis so far?
I think the stats team at Leeds would be able to answer that question, but there's a whole AI department in most of the universities now which are looking at these questions, and I'm pretty sure AI will be looking at these inputs, and I'm pretty sure that there is work going on at the moment.
The thing with AI is it doesn't necessarily answer a question. You put all the data in and it spits something out. And the statistical analysis of trials like this is very driven by what are you asking and what do you want to know. Whereas AI is you sort of chuck everything in and then it spits something out. So I don't think we're using AI at this point to look at trial data sets, but we have talked about it.
Yeah, but if you ever did, it obviously wouldn't compromise quality. It would add to.
No. It would tell you something very interesting.
Yeah,
I've got my own view on what it would show. So
I think it will tell you what you input into it.
There's a bit of that,
yeah. But at the end of the day, when the stats are constructed for a trial, everything is pre-specified what we're looking into it. So, but there are very big units, especially in Denmark, which are looking at this question.
Thank you so much, Tal, David, Doina, for your presentations.
Thank you for asking us. Thank you.
Thank you.